My deceased husband, the pastor, had a safe full of churchwomen's secrets. "It's between me and God," he used to say. When I discovered what he was hiding behind the painting of the Last Supper, I realized that the devil also uses the Bible to do his work. What a blessing to speak with y'all today, my dear hearts. I'm Judith Garrison, a 78-year-old widow living in Millerville, Arkansas. A small town where everyone knows everyone, where gossip travels faster than rain in a storm, and where faith has always been the pillar of our community. These days, I live a peaceful life, thanks to the good Lord. Every morning, I wake up with the roosters crow while it's still dark. I prepare my coffee, put on my best dress, and go to the little church to pray. It's funny how life comes full circle, isn't it? After spending so many years as the pastor's wife, now I only enter the church when nobody's there. I prefer to talk to God in silence, just him and me. After my morning prayer, I return home and do my chores. I spend the rest of the day tending to my chickens and my herb garden. I grow a little bit of everything: rosemary, basil, rue, snake plant. Each with its purpose, each with its protection. And in the late afternoon, when the sun is setting, that's when I perform my most important ritual. I kneel in my bedroom, light a candle, and pray for forgiveness for my sins. Oh, my children, everyone has sins, don't they? Some tiny ones, others as big as mountains. Mine, well, mine is the kind I carry silently in my heart. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill," but it also says many things about justice. And it was in seeking justice that I committed the greatest sin of my life. A sin that, if I confess to you here, you'll understand why I pray so much asking for forgiveness. But you might also understand why I sleep so peacefully despite everything. I started this prayer ritual after I buried my husband, Pastor Ezekiel. A man respected by everyone here in Millerville, God's voice on earth, as they used to say. If they knew the truth I discovered. But that's a story for later. And you, my dears who are watching me now, tell me in the comments, from which small town are you watching? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, y'all. Let's create a chain of kindness. But before I start the story I want to tell today, I need to say it's not an easy one. It's about appearances that deceive, about how the most respected people can hide terrible secrets, and about how sometimes justice needs to come from the hands of who you least expect. It's the story of how I discovered my pastor husband's secret safe, and what I did when I understood the evil that was hiding behind the Word of God. I was born in 1947 on a small farm near Crossroads, Missouri, a dry land, but blessed by God. My father, Sherman Garrison, was a strict man, the kind who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected. Just one look, and all of us, me, my mother, and my 5 siblings, knew it was time to obey without questioning. Mama, Dolores, was the opposite, sweet as honey, always speaking softly, humming while washing clothes by the creek. From her, I inherited my quiet ways and patience. "A woman who's a real woman accepts her burden with dignity," she always said. And I learned that lesson early on. Our house was simple, tin roof, dirt floor. Basic, but clean as a whistle. We had a wood stove where Mama made the best cornbread in the county, and a big yard with chickens, goats, and a small garden that depended on the rain. In good years, we ate well. In drought years, we lived on faith and grits. My childhood had the color of red earth and the smell of wildflowers. We woke up with the first rooster crow around 4 in the morning, and soon everyone knew their chores. Being the second oldest, I helped Mama with the house and with the younger siblings. Washing clothes, fetching water from the well, pounding corn for meal, looking after the little ones. My brothers worked in the fields with Daddy. Playing? Only after all chores were done, and even then, they were simple games. We made dolls from corn husks, played jacks with pebbles, sang Ring Around the Rosie when the moon was full. My closest friend was Jenny, Deacon Thompson's daughter, always together, sharing whispered dreams under the old oak tree. At school, I was diligent. I learned to read and write quickly, but I only got to study until 4th grade. A woman doesn't need much book learning, Daddy said. What she needs is to know how to keep house and obey. And so it was. By 11, I was practically running the whole house when Mama got sick, which happened frequently after she had my youngest brother, Joseph. It was around this time that church became more important in our lives. Back in Crossroads, there wasn't a Baptist church, just the Catholic chapel where the priest came once a month. But one day, a traveling preacher arrived in the region, a tall man with a strong voice who set up a tent and started holding services. Daddy, who had never been much for going to church, was enchanted with the preaching. "This man speaks the truth," he said. And so, our entire family converted. Religion entered our home with force. Mama started reading the Bible every day, even with difficulty. Daddy became even stricter with the rules. No vanity, no worldly festivities, no friendships with heathens. Obedience, which was already important, became divine law. "Daughter, obeying your parents is obeying God," Mama taught me. I was 12 when I noticed that the men from church looked at me differently. I was becoming a young woman, and that scared me. Mama noticed and called me aside. "Judith, now you need to be even more careful. A woman's body is a sacred temple, but it's also a temptation for men. Guard yourself." And she taught me to walk with my head down, not to smile too much, to wear clothes that hid the forms that were starting to appear. But it was one of those men of God who first made me understand the danger. Brother Josiah, one of the deacons of the new church, a married man and father of 3, cornered me one day behind the tent after service. "You're provoking men with that little way of yours," he said, while his hands tried to reach where they shouldn't. I managed to escape, running without looking back, my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. When I got home, trembling, I told Mama. She looked at me with a mix of sadness and resignation. "You must have given him reason, girl. A man doesn't advance if he's not provoked." And she taught me to avoid contact even more, to be invisible. That's when I learned. In church, as at home, the blame always falls on a woman's shoulders. We never spoke of it again. And I kept that lesson as I kept so many others. In silence, swallowing tears, accepting that this was the world God had made for us women. A world where our voice was worth less than a whisper, where our value was in serving and obeying. But something inside me, a stubborn little spark that I didn't quite understand myself, refused to fully accept. At night, lying on my pallet, while everyone slept, I looked through the cracks in the wall and saw the stars in the sky. So free, so bright. And I dreamed, oh how I dreamed, of one day shining too. I didn't know yet that this dream of freedom would take decades to come true. And that the path would be much more painful than I, a 12-year-old girl raised in strictness and fear, could imagine. When I turned 15, in 1962, my father decided it was time for me to get married. "An old maid is a shame for the family," he said, as he evaluated the suitors. And there were quite a few. In our region, a skilled girl like me, raised in the rigidity of obedience, was considered a good catch. But Daddy had ambitions. He didn't want to give me to just anyone. That's when a young pastor, fresh from the seminary in Springfield, arrived in Crossroads. Ezekiel Garrison was 28 years old, twice my age, tall, with a firm voice and piercing gaze. They said he had a bright future in the church, that he was destined for great things. I remember his first sermon. He was wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, something rare in that country of simple clothes. His preaching was about the role of women according to the Bible. "The good wife is submissive, modest, and God-fearing," he thundered from the pulpit, while the women nodded in agreement. I saw when his eyes landed on me, sitting in the front pew, as Daddy required. It was a lingering, evaluating look. The following Sunday, he showed up at our house for lunch after service. An invitation from Daddy, which I only learned of when the time came. While I served the table, head down as I had been taught, I felt his gaze following me. "Your daughter has been well raised, Brother Sherman," he commented, as if appraising merchandise. "Obedient and silent, as she should be." 2 weeks later, he asked for my hand in marriage. Not to me, of course. He asked my father, who accepted immediately. I only found out when everything was already settled. "It will be an honor for our family," said Mama, fixing my hair. "Being a pastor's wife is a blessing that few receive." I didn't have the courage to say I didn't want to, that I was afraid, that something in his look froze me inside. The girl raised to obey fulfilled her role. The wedding was set for 3 months later, just enough time to prepare a simple trousseau and organize the ceremony. On the eve of the wedding, Mama called me for a talk. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were sitting on the back doorstep while she shelled beans. "Judith, tomorrow you'll be a married woman," she began, without looking me in the eye. "You need to know your duties." "Yes, Mama," I replied softly. "The man is the head of the household, it's God's law. You owe obedience to your husband in everything." Her hands didn't stop working as she spoke. "Even when you don't understand, even when you don't agree." She paused, as if choosing her words. "And there are wifely duties." Her voice got even lower. "Don't deny your body when he wants it. It's his right. It's in the Bible. It doesn't matter if you're tired or if it hurts. Close your eyes and think of Jesus." I felt my face burn with shame. Mama continued, "And never, ever tell anyone what happens inside the bedroom or inside your home. The problems of a couple are between the couple and God. Understand?" "Yes, Mama." She finally looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. It wasn't just sadness. It was a warning. Pray a lot, my daughter. A woman's life isn't easy. The wedding happened on a stuffy Saturday in October. The small church was full, everyone wanting to honor the new pastor and his young bride. I wore a simple white dress, sewn by Mama. When Pastor Thaddeus, who came from Springfield especially for the ceremony, asked if I accepted Ezekiel as my lawful husband, my voice barely came out. "Yes," I whispered, sealing my fate. That same night, I discovered what Mama meant by "even when it hurts." Ezekiel wasn't gentle. There was no affection, no preparation. When I cried, he only stopped to say, "A good wife doesn't cry. A good wife is grateful." I dried my tears and did as I had been taught, closed my eyes, and thought of Jesus. The next morning at breakfast, he handed me a handwritten list. "These are the rules of our house," he said. "I expect total obedience." The list had more than 20 items. Schedules for each meal, how the house should be cleaned, what clothes I could wear, how I should behave in church, who I could talk to. Even the tone of voice I could use was specified. Never louder than a whisper inside the house. 2 months after the wedding, Ezekiel announced he had received a call to pastor a church in Millerville, Arkansas. "It's an opportunity sent by God," he said, with that gleam in his eyes that I was already beginning to recognize. The gleam of someone who sees power, not service. We left Missouri on a cold December morning. The farewell to my parents was quick, without much emotion. "Obey your husband," was Daddy's last advice. Mama just hugged me tight, tighter than normal, as if wanting to say something that words couldn't express. The journey was long and tiring, first by truck to Springfield, then by bus to Little Rock, and finally another truck to Millerville. When we arrived, it was already night. The town was bigger than Crossroads, had electric lights in almost all houses, a central square with a gazebo and several churches. The one that would be pastored by Ezekiel was on a side street, a simple brick building with a wooden cross on the facade. Next door was the parsonage, where we would live. Better than my parents' house, but still modest. 2 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, and a bathroom. A luxury I had never had before. "This will be our home for now," said Ezekiel as he opened the door. "But I have bigger plans. This congregation will grow, and we will grow with it." That first night in Millerville, while Ezekiel slept, I lay awake looking at the unfamiliar ceiling. I was hundreds of miles from my family, in a strange town, with a man who frightened me more each day. But I still had hope. Maybe he would improve with time. Maybe I would learn to be the wife he wanted. Maybe God would hear my prayers. I didn't know yet that the hell I knew was just the beginning. That the mask of the man of God would hide, for years on end, a monster that not even in my worst nightmares could I have imagined. The next morning, my life as the pastor's wife in Millerville began. I woke up before sunrise to prepare coffee exactly as he liked it. When he entered the kitchen, he examined every detail: the set table, the temperature of the coffee, my tied-back hair, and my long, modest dress. "Remember," he said as he drank his coffee, "now you are the example for all the women in the church. A slip from you is a slip from me, and I do not tolerate slips." It was on that first day that I noticed how the parsonage had thin walls but thick doors, as if it were built so that appearances could be maintained, while what happened behind closed doors remained well guarded. It was also in the first month in Millerville that I saw for the first time the safe. I was tidying Ezekiel's office in the church vestry when he caught me looking at a painting of the Last Supper. "Never come in here without my permission," he said, startling me. I hadn't heard him arrive. "This is a sacred place, only for men of God." That night, I received the first physical punishment for entering the office without permission. "It's out of love that I correct you," he said as he unbuckled his belt, "as God corrects his children." And so began the darkest years of my life. The years passed, and each day in the parsonage was like stepping into a minefield. I never knew what might spark Ezekiel's wrath. Coffee not hot enough, a shirt not pressed at the creases just right, a word said in the wrong tone. Anything served as a reason for the corrections, as he called them. "It's my duty, as your husband and pastor, to mold you into the image God expects," he would say, while I held back tears. "Be thankful for the correction." And I would thank him, head bowed, the marks hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars. In front of others, we were the perfect couple. He, the charismatic pastor who made the congregation grow each month. I, the dedicated wife who played piano at services, coordinated the women's prayer circle, and smiled sweetly at everyone. "See how Sister Judith is an example of a Christian woman," he would say from the pulpit, while I sat in the front pew, hands folded in my lap, eyes lowered. Submissive, modest, silent. What nobody knew was that this submission was maintained at a steep price. In the early years, I still tried a few times to stand up for myself. When I discovered I was pregnant in 1965, I thought things would change. That the arrival of a child would make Ezekiel gentler. It was my biggest mistake. "You think a baby will give you some power in this house?" he roared when I shared the news, expecting a hug. Instead, I received a push so hard that I hit the kitchen wall. "This child will be mine, not yours. It will learn early who's in charge here." I lost the baby 2 weeks later. The town doctor said, "These things happen, that many women lose their first child." But I knew the truth. As I recovered in bed, Ezekiel appeared with a Bible in hand. "See what happens when you try to rise above your place?" he said, flipping through the pages until he found what he was looking for. Proverbs 16:18. "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." It was God who took this child to teach you humility. I never got pregnant again. Perhaps my body knew it wasn't safe to bring a child into that house. Or maybe it was just another of the divine punishments Ezekiel said I deserved. Over time, the church grew. From a small congregation of 30 people, it came to have more than 200 members. We built a larger temple, and the parsonage was also expanded. Ezekiel gained respect in the town and even in neighboring towns. He was called to preach at conferences, to counsel other pastors, the anointed of God, as many called him. In 1970, when we had been in Millerville for 8 years, Ezekiel's routine changed. He began to do individual pastoral counseling with women from the church. Always behind closed doors, always in his office in the vestry. These are delicate matters, issues of a private nature, he would explain when anyone questioned. They need privacy so that the sisters can open their hearts without embarrassment. It was during this time that I noticed a pattern. After these counseling sessions, Ezekiel would spend hours locked in his office, and the women were never the same again. Some left the church, others stayed, but with empty gazes, avoiding crossing my path. One of them was Nancy, wife of the store owner Albert, a cheerful woman with an easy smile who suddenly became quiet and evasive. Once, I tried to talk to her after the service. "Sister Nancy, it's been a while since we've talked. Is everything all right?" She looked at me as if seeing a ghost. "Everything's great, Sister Judith. Your husband is a man of God, a true man of God." And she hurried away, almost running. Then there was Mary Beth, the young daughter of Deacon Jeremiah. She was only 17 when she started attending the counseling sessions. Soon after, she hastily married a boy from the neighboring town and never set foot in the church again. I commented to Ezekiel about these changes. It was a terrible mistake. "Are you watching me now? Questioning my pastoral work?" His face turned red with anger. "Who do you think you are to doubt my calling? To doubt God?" The punishment that night was one of the worst. I was bedridden for 3 days, telling everyone I had a bad flu. Nobody questioned. Nobody ever questioned. Over time, I learned to become completely invisible, to move through the house and church like a ghost, fulfilling my obligations without making noise, without drawing attention. I stopped speaking unless someone asked me something directly. I avoided looking people in the eye. I smiled only when necessary, a mechanical smile that never reached my eyes. At night, alone in bed while Ezekiel worked late in his office, I prayed. No longer for liberation, I had lost that hope long ago. I prayed for strength to endure one more day. And secretly, I prayed that the other women would find a way out that I couldn't see. In 1975, Ezekiel's health began to show signs of fragility. At 41, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure and heart problems. The doctor recommended a strict diet, no salt, no fat. It was up to me to prepare it, of course. "If the food isn't good, it's your fault if I die," he threatened. "You'll carry that weight forever." It was during this period that I discovered, by chance, his medical secret. Rummaging through a drawer in search of medicine, I found an old medical report. Ezekiel had a severe allergy to nuts, so severe that a small amount could cause a fatal anaphylactic shock. I kept this information to myself, not knowing why. Perhaps it was just the instinct of someone living in captivity. Any information could be useful someday. The years continued to pass, and my life was reduced to being the perfect shadow of the great pastor Ezekiel Garrison. On Sundays, I wore my best dress, tied my hair in a perfect bun, and sat in the first pew with hands crossed over my Bible. I smiled at greetings, thanked compliments about how I was an example of a Christian woman. Nobody saw the strategically covered bruises. Nobody heard the muffled screams behind the parsonage walls. Nobody noticed my dead eyes, the smile that never reached my gaze, until, in 1983, something broke in me. It wasn't a big event. There wasn't a punishment worse than others. It was something small, almost insignificant. We had a new family in the church, Brother Joshua, his wife Magdalene, and their daughter Rachel, just 14 years old. A sweet girl with big eyes and a shy smile. One Sunday morning, I saw Ezekiel looking at her in a way I knew well. The same look he had directed at so many others over the years. After the service, he announced, "Young Rachel will begin pastoral counseling this week. She has shown interest in being baptized, and we need to prepare her properly." That night, while washing the dinner dishes, I realized my hands were shaking. A cold rage, different from anything I had ever felt, began to grow inside me. Not for myself, I had accepted my fate long ago, but for Rachel, for that girl who still had a sparkle in her eyes that I had lost 20 years ago. That's when I decided that, somehow, this needed to end. The Tuesday following the announcement of Rachel's counseling, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that innocent girl entering Ezekiel's office, not knowing what awaited her. The same scene that had repeated itself so many times, with so many different women, for so many years. And I, always silent, always complicit in my silence. My heart was beating so hard, I thought it would explode in my chest. For the first time in more than 20 years, I made a decision on my own. I needed to see what happened in that office. I needed to be sure. On Wednesday, Ezekiel left to visit a sick member in the rural area. He would be gone all day. "Don't enter my office," he ordered before leaving, as he always did. And for the first time, I decided I would disobey. With trembling legs from fear, I entered the empty church. The only sound was that of my heart beating and the creaking of the wooden floor under my feet. The vestry was at the back, a door always locked. I hadn't entered there in years. I didn't have the key, of course. Ezekiel always carried it with him, along with 2 others on the same keychain, the house key and the car key. But I knew there was a copy. I had seen Ezekiel give it to Deacon Matthew once, when he needed him to get some documents while he was traveling. Deacon Matthew lived 2 streets from the church, an elderly man, a widower, who tended the church garden in his spare time. He had been the first convert when we arrived in town, loyal to Ezekiel like a dog to its master. I made up a story. I said that Ezekiel had called from Brother Silas's house, where there was no phone, so no one could confirm, asking for some urgent papers from the office. He said, "You have a copy of the key, Brother Matthew." The old man looked at me suspiciously. The pastor never lets anyone in there without him. I swallowed hard. "It's an emergency. It has to do with Rachel's baptism. He needs the documents for today." My hands were cold with sweat as I lied. I had never lied before. It was as if someone else was speaking through my mouth. After a moment of hesitation, Matthew went to a sugar jar on the shelf and took out a small key. "Return it as soon as you're done, Sister Judith, and don't touch anything besides the papers he asked for." "Of course, Brother Matthew. Thank you." I returned to the church with the key hidden in the palm of my hand like a forbidden treasure, or a secret weapon. My legs were shaking so much that I had to stop several times to take deep breaths. Ezekiel's voice echoed in my head. "Disobedience is the path to hell, Judith." But something stronger was driving me. The image of Rachel, so young, so much like me when I arrived in Millerville. I couldn't let history repeat itself. The key turned easily in the lock. The door opened without a sound, as if it too was conspiring with me. The office was exactly as I remembered. A large, dark wood desk, shelves with religious books, 2 green upholstered chairs, one behind the desk, another in front, and on the wall behind the desk, the painting of the Last Supper that I had noticed so many years ago. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I searched the desk drawers first. I found church documents, financial records, nothing that seemed suspicious or revealing. The cabinets also held only the expected: Bible study materials, stacks of evangelistic pamphlets, boxes with tithe envelopes. I was almost giving up when my gaze returned to the painting of the Last Supper. I remembered how Ezekiel had become furious when he caught me looking at it in our first month in town. I approached and examined the frame. It looked normal, just a common picture. Then I noticed the wall behind the painting sounded hollow when I lightly tapped it with my knuckles. Different from the rest of the wall. With my heart pounding, I removed the painting, and there it was, a metal safe embedded in the wall. I stood paralyzed for a few moments. A safe. What could be stored there that was so important? Church money? Secret documents? Or something worse? The safe had a numeric keypad, not a key. It needed a 6-digit combination. I tried the obvious first. Ezekiel's birth date. Nothing. The date of our wedding. Nothing. The founding date of the church. Nothing. Then I remembered something. A verse that Ezekiel frequently cited in his sermons about judgment, Revelation 20:12. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. With trembling fingers, I typed 2012 20. The safe emitted a soft click and the door opened. Inside, there was no money. There were no church documents. There were small boxes, each with a name handwritten on the lid. Women's names, dozens of them. Many I recognized, women from the congregation, young women who had passed through the church, visitors who had stayed for a short time. Some boxes had names I didn't know, probably from other towns where Ezekiel occasionally preached. With trembling hands, I took the first box. It had the name Nancy written on the lid. I opened it and found inside a small gold earring, a lock of hair, and a folded sheet of paper. I unfolded the paper and read. It was a detailed list of sins confessed by Nancy during counseling. Intimate, shameful things, the kind of secret that no one would ever tell voluntarily. And at the end of the list, written in red, complete submission achieved on 07/15/1970. I took another box, Mary Beth. Inside, an embroidered handkerchief, a hair ribbon, and another sheet with confessions. At the end, the same terrifying phrase, complete submission achieved on 10/03/1971. Box after box, the same pattern repeated. A personal object, almost like a trophy, a lock of hair, a document with intimate secrets, and that final phrase marking the moment when Ezekiel managed to completely break that woman's will. When I reached the last row of boxes, I found one that froze my blood. It had my name, Judith. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was my mother's gold wedding ring, the only thing of value she had given me before the wedding, and which Ezekiel took from me on our first night together, saying that a married woman doesn't need family jewels. There was also a lock of my hair, cut while I slept on our wedding night, and the sheet of paper listing my sins, mostly invented by him to justify the punishments. At the end, the words, complete submission achieved on 01/14/1963. Just 3 months after our wedding, and a few weeks after we arrived in Millerville, I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. All that time, all those women, they weren't just pastoral counseling sessions that went beyond boundaries. It was a system, a meticulous plan to identify vulnerable women, extract their deepest secrets, use those secrets to manipulate and subdue them. And then I saw, on the last shelf of the safe, a new box. With fresh calligraphy, the name Rachel was written on the lid. The box was empty, waiting to be filled, waiting for Rachel to become another victim. Something inside me exploded, a cold, crystalline rage, different from anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just for me now. It was for all of us, for each woman in those boxes, for the haircut while they slept, for the forced secrets, for the stolen dignity, and for young Rachel, whose future would be destroyed if I did nothing. I closed the safe, replaced the painting on the wall, and left the office, carefully locking it. I returned the key to Deacon Matthew, who didn't even ask about the documents that Ezekiel supposedly needed. I returned home on autopilot, prepared dinner as I always did, set the table. When Ezekiel arrived, I served him in silence, answered his questions with the usual respect, listened to his accounts of the visit to the sick member. But inside me, something had changed forever. The broken woman, the silent shadow, had died in that office. In her place was born something new, something determined and relentless. That night, While Ezekiel slept, I lay awake thinking. I couldn't simply denounce him. Who would believe the wife against the pastor? I couldn't run away. I had no money, nowhere to go, and he would find me. I couldn't confront him. It would be suicide. I needed a plan that would free not just me, but all the other women. A plan that would ensure that Rachel and any other young girl would be safe. I remembered the medical report I had found years ago, the severe allergy to nuts. And then, with frightening clarity, I saw the way forward. It wouldn't be quick, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be final. As the sun rose, I already knew exactly what I needed to do. The plan needed to be perfect. There would be no second chance. If Ezekiel survived, he would discover what I did, and my fate would be worse than death. I spent sleepless nights thinking about every detail, calculating each step. It was as if my whole life of silent observation had been training for this moment. For 4 weeks, I studied his habits with renewed attention. I had lived more than 20 years observing him carefully for survival, but now I observed with a different purpose. I noted that on Thursdays, he always arrived later for dinner, tired from counseling. On these days, he was more distracted, less attentive to what I was doing. I noticed that his favorite dish was chicken stew with okra, which I prepared once a month, and which he praised as the only thing you do really well. I noticed that he always drank a glass of juice before eating, while telling about his day, with that satisfaction of a satiated predator. I needed to be discreet in execution. I started visiting the market more frequently, buying a little at a time to not raise suspicions. Mrs. Ellen, from the grocery store, even found it strange when I bought pecans. "What's this novelty, Sister Judith? Does the pastor like them?" I smiled that rehearsed smile of so many years. "It's for a cake that Sister Cynthia taught me, a surprise for the church anniversary." The pecans were stored at the back of the pantry, hidden in a flour jar that Ezekiel would never open. I also bought a new grater, small enough to hide in the sleeve of my dress, and a bottle of concentrated mango juice, his favorite flavor, strong enough to disguise any strange taste. In the days leading up to the execution of the plan, I almost gave up several times, not out of fear or guilt, but from a lifetime conditioned to submission. His voice echoed in my head. A woman who raises a hand against her husband has a place marked in hell. But then I remembered the safe, the boxes, the names, the empty box waiting for Rachel, and my determination returned, stronger than ever. I carefully chose the date, March 17th, 1984, a Thursday, counseling day. Also the day marked for Rachel's first counseling session. It wasn't a coincidence. If I waited longer, it might be too late for the girl. The week before, I did a test. I prepared the chicken stew as usual, but added a minimal amount of ground pecan to my own plate. I wanted to make sure the flavor wouldn't be detected. I ate without noticing any difference in taste. The test was a success. On Wednesday, the eve of the chosen day, I saw Rachel at the farmer's market with her mother. She seemed nervous, restless. I approached casually and commented on the weather, on the season's fruits. Then, when her mother moved away to examine some vegetables, I whispered to the girl, "If you can, make up a headache tomorrow. Postpone the counseling with my husband." She looked at me confused, frightened. She didn't say anything, but I saw in her eyes that she had understood. When her mother returned, I said goodbye normally and went on my way, my heart pounding. It was the first time in decades that I openly disobeyed Ezekiel. If he discovered that small act of rebellion, but something told me he wouldn't discover it. He wouldn't have time. The night before the big day, I could hardly sleep, not from fear or guilt, but from a strange sense of peace. As if finally, after decades, I had found my true purpose. At 3 a.m, I got up silently and went to the kitchen. I took the pecans from their hiding place and tried grating one to see how long it would take, how much powder it would produce. It was meticulous work. each pecan yielding less than a teaspoon of fine powder. On Thursday morning, I prepared as usual, made coffee for Ezekiel, laid out his clothes, served him in silence. When he left for the church, I watched him through the kitchen window. He seemed so ordinary, so normal. No one would ever suspect that under that impeccable suit and that pastoral smile hid a monster. As soon as he left, I began preparations for the special dinner. I set aside the chicken, cut the vegetables, prepared the okra as he liked it, very thin, almost disappearing in the broth. I worked with a concentration I had never felt before. Each movement was precise, each detail planned. At 3 p.m, I locked myself in the bathroom with the bag of pecans I had saved. With the small grater, I reduced 2 whole pecans to a fine powder almost invisible. The work was slow, and my fingers ached with the effort of grating the hard pecans against the fine metal of the grater. It took almost an hour. When I finished, I had less than 2 teaspoons of powder. It seemed so little for something so decisive. I put the powder in a paper envelope that I hid in the pocket of my apron. At 5, I received a phone call from Deacon Matthew. Rachel had canceled the counseling, claiming a severe migraine. Ezekiel was furious, had rescheduled for the next week, and was now at Brother Jeremy's house, discussing church matters. He asked me to let you know that he'll be late for dinner, Sister Judith. He should arrive around 8. Thank you, Brother Matthew. Dinner will be waiting. I hung up the phone with a sense of relief. Rachel had heard me. At least for another week she would be safe. At 6, I began cooking in earnest. The chicken stew needed to be perfect, exactly as he liked it. Any difference could arouse suspicion. As the chicken cooked with the spices, saffron, cumin, black pepper, I mentally rehearsed each step of what I was about to do. At 7:30, dinner was ready. The table set with care, the steaming chicken stew in a ceramic dish, the mango juice in the glass pitcher. While waiting, I took the envelope from my pocket. It was so little powder. Would it be enough? The doctor had said that even a minimal amount could be fatal for someone with a severe allergy. Still, I couldn't risk it. I took 1 more pecan and grated it too, adding the powder to the envelope. I sat in the kitchen chair, envelope in hand, and for a moment hesitated. What I was about to do had no turning back. I, who had been raised to obey, to serve, to submit to the will of man and God, was about to commit the gravest sin of all. But then, like a film, I saw pass in my mind each of the boxes in the safe. Each name, each lock of hair, each confession forcibly extracted, each life destroyed. "Forgive me, Lord," I whispered to the kitchen ceiling. "If this takes me to hell, so be it. But I cannot allow him to destroy more lives." At 8 o'clock sharp, I heard Ezekiel's car parking in front of the house. I served a glass of juice and, with strangely steady hands, poured the contents of the envelope into the orange liquid. I stirred well with a spoon until I was sure the powder was completely dissolved. There was no going back. Ezekiel entered, throwing his jacket over the sofa, as he always did. He seemed tired, but satisfied. Like a predator after a successful hunt. "That girl, Rachel, canceled the counseling," he commented, irritated. "Said she had a migraine. Migraine! When it was her spiritual counseling. What disrespect for the things of God." "What a shame, dear," I replied softly, while arranging his place at the table. "Maybe next week she'll be better." "She will be," he said with that tone I knew so well. "I've already spoken with the parents. There will be no more excuses." I served him the glass of juice, as I did every night. "You must be tired and thirsty. The juice is fresh." He took a long sip of juice, closing his eyes for a moment. "Excellent, as always. You have your flaws, Judith, but you know how to prepare a good juice." I served the chicken stew, first to him, then a small portion for myself. As always, he ate unhurriedly, savoring each forkful while talking about plans for the church, about how God was opening doors, about how his influence was growing in the region. "I'm thinking of expanding the counseling," he said between one forkful and another. There are many young women in the church needing spiritual guidance. This generation is lost in the world. I nodded in silence, watching him eat. Each second seemed like an eternity. Had I miscalculated? Was the powder not enough? Were the doctors wrong about the severity of the allergy? Then it happened. In the middle of a sentence about the construction of the new church annex, Ezekiel stopped. He brought his hand to his throat. His eyes widened in panic. "Can't breathe," he gasped, his voice already hoarse. I got up calmly. "What's wrong, dear? Are you feeling ill?" "Help," he tried to say, his face already beginning to swell, red patches appearing on his neck. "Hospital." I took his juice glass and mine, carrying them to the sink. I washed them carefully while he struggled to breathe behind me. "You know, Ezekiel, I found your safe last week." He tried to stand up, but his legs gave way. He fell to the floor, gasping like a fish out of water. All those boxes, all those women. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm. The box with Rachel's name, empty, waiting, just as mine was empty once. He reached out to me, pleading with his eyes what he could no longer say with his mouth. His nails were beginning to turn blue. Proverbs 16:18, I quoted, looking him in the eyes. "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Remember when you told me that? When I lost our baby?" Ezekiel was on the floor now, convulsing slightly. His eyes showed understanding. He knew what was happening. He knew who was responsible. "No one will suspect," I continued, now sitting on the floor beside him, but out of reach. The pious Pastor Ezekiel, with his known heart problem, a sudden attack during dinner, a tragedy. Everyone will comfort me, the poor widow. His eyes stared at me with a hatred that for the first time in my life didn't cause me any fear at all. "This is for me, for Nancy, for Mary Beth, for every woman in those boxes, and for Rachel, whom you will never touch." Those were his last words. Ezekiel died right there, on the kitchen floor of the parsonage, at 50 years of age, victim of a severe anaphylactic shock. I sat beside him for 20 more minutes, just to be sure. Then I called Deacon Matthew. "Come quickly, brother. The pastor is very ill." When he arrived 15 minutes later, I had already washed the dinner dishes, stored the food, and stamped on my face the appropriate expression of despair. He suddenly fainted. I called his name, tried to wake him, but he doesn't respond. Deacon Matthew called an ambulance and then began to telephone other church members. In less than an hour, the parsonage was full. Women hugged me, trying to comfort the desperate wife. Men gathered in prayer circles. The doctor arrived, examined the body, and declared death by probable heart attack. "It could have also been a severe allergic reaction," he commented. "Did the pastor have any known allergies?" "Not that I know of," I lied, with lowered eyes. "He was always so healthy, just had that little heart problem." The doctor nodded, understanding. "Sometimes these allergies develop suddenly, or maybe he ingested something without knowing. Anyway, it was very quick. He probably didn't suffer much." I didn't have the courage to say that I hoped he had suffered every second. Instead, I cried. Real tears of relief, of liberation, which everyone interpreted as deep pain. The rest of the night was a blur of people coming and going from the house. I needed to maintain composure, the role of the devastated widow. Inside, however, I felt a lightness I hadn't known since I was a girl, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders, as if I could, finally, breathe. I slept that night, for the first time in 22 years, without fear, a deep sleep, without nightmares, without starts. When I woke up for a moment, I still expected to hear Ezekiel's voice giving orders. But there was only silence, a blessed silence. The preparations for the funeral took the next 2 days. The entire church mobilized. The most expensive coffin, the most beautiful flowers, the noblest place in the cemetery. The man of God deserved nothing less than that. Ezekiel's funeral was the largest Millerville had ever seen. Pastors from all over the region came to pay tribute. Some had tears in their eyes when they spoke of the example of a faithful servant, of the man of integrity who leaves an immortal legacy. I stood beside the coffin for hours, receiving condolences, thanking for the support, playing the role of the devastated widow to perfection. After all, I had 22 years of practice in pretending. During the burial, I noticed something curious. Some women, the same ones I knew had boxes in the safe, weren't crying. Their eyes, like mine, were dry. Their faces, composed into solemn expressions, didn't show the pain everyone expected. Our gazes crossed briefly. There were no words, no gestures, just a silent understanding, an invisible communion. But the story didn't end with the burial. 3 days later, I returned to the church. Using the key I had taken from Ezekiel's pocket before the body was removed, I entered the office. The painting of the Last Supper was still in the same place. The safe, behind it, kept the same secrets. I typed the combination, 2012-20. The safe door opened with that same soft click I had heard the first time. The boxes were there, organized in perfectly aligned rows, each with a feminine name on the lid, each containing the secrets and shames he had collected over the years. Carefully, I removed all the boxes. One by one, I opened them and removed the trophies, earrings, rings, handkerchiefs, locks of hair. Objects that, for him, represented conquests, power. For the women, they represented humiliation, fear, forced submission. I put each item in a separate envelope with the owner's name written on the outside. The documents with the forced secrets and shames, I burned them all in the backyard of the church, watching the ashes rise to the night sky like an offering. With each piece of paper that turned to ashes, I felt that part of the power that Ezekiel had exerted over all of us also dissolved in the air. In the following weeks, I found ways to return each trophy to its rightful owner. An envelope without a return address in the mailbox. A small package left at the door. For some who had left town, I asked the mailman to deliver to their new homes, saying it was a memento from the old church. I never attached notes, never identified myself. I didn't need to. Each woman knew exactly what those objects meant, and they knew, without me needing to say, that the man who had subjugated them could no longer hurt them. Nancy, the store owner's wife, met me at the market 2 weeks after receiving her earring back. She didn't mention the envelope, didn't thank me directly. She just held my hand for a moment longer than normal when she greeted me and said, looking into my eyes, "May God bless you, Sister Judith. Truly." Mary Beth, who had moved to Little Rock after her hasty marriage, came back to visit her parents a few months later. We crossed paths in the church square. She stopped, looked at me for a long time, and then, to my surprise, hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear before quickly moving away, with tears in her eyes. I never told the truth to anyone. I didn't need to. It was enough to see in each of their eyes the silent understanding when we crossed on the street or at the market. A small nod, a look that said, "We are free." As for the box with my name, I kept it. My mother's wedding ring returned to my finger. The lock of hair and the submission document burned along with all the others. The church offered me the parsonage to continue living in. After all, where else would the poor widow of the pastor go? I accepted, but only for the time necessary to organize my life. 6 months after the funeral, I sold the house that Ezekiel and I had bought as an investment in Little Rock, a property he kept secret from the congregation, paid for with money diverted from tithes. With the money, I bought a simple small house on the outskirts of Millerville and began a small chicken farm. Why didn't I leave town? Some might ask. The truth is that I had nowhere else to go. I no longer had family in Missouri. My parents had already passed away. My siblings were scattered across the country. And besides, I wanted to stay close enough to see the result of what I did, to see Rachel grow up and marry without the invisible scars that so many others carried, to see, one by one, the women of the boxes reclaim their lives, their smiles, their dignity. I never married again. Never wanted to. The freedom I found in widowhood was too sweet to trade for any company. In the early years, some men from the church, widowers, older bachelors, insinuated interest. I refused them all politely, saying that my heart still belongs to Pastor Ezekiel. No one suspected that the truth was exactly the opposite. My heart, finally, belonged only to me. Over time, the legend of the great Pastor Ezekiel Garrison grew in the town. The sanctuary dedicated to his memory, the annual service in his honor. I attended them all, always dressed in black, always with a small smile that everyone interpreted as longing. No one ever knew that in each of these services I celebrated not the life of the man, but his absence, celebrated the fact that he would never hurt anyone again. As for Rachel, she grew up, became a teacher, and today directs the town's municipal school. She married a gentle man, had 3 children. Sometimes I meet her at the market, we exchange smiles. She never knew how close she came to having her life destroyed. And it's better that way. If they miss the man they knew, I miss the woman I could have been if I had never known him. The girl from Crossroads, Missouri, who dreamed looking at the stars through the cracks in the wall. The young woman who could have studied, traveled, truly loved. But I don't regret it. Not for a second. And on nights when the weight of what I did tries to visit me, I remember the boxes in the safe, the names, the broken lives, and I sleep the sleep of the just. Today, at 78 years old, I live a life I never imagined possible when I was that terrified young wife. I'm still here in Millerville, in the same simple little house I bought after Ezekiel's death. Time has passed, the town has grown, but some corners still keep the same peace that embraced me when I could finally breathe without fear. My house is a bit away from downtown, surrounded by a large yard where I raise my chickens. There are more than 20 now, all with names. There's Speckles, Dottie, Bard, Pepper, each with her own temperament, her own story. I wake up early before the sun rises to feed them. They already know me, run to me as soon as I open the door to the coop. It's a joy to see these little creatures of God so free, so carefree. In the same yard, I have my herb garden, a special corner that I cultivate with great care. Rosemary for memory, basil to ward off bad energies, rue for protection, snake plant to guard the house. I learned about the power of these plants from Miss Sarah, a lady I met at the farmer's market years ago. She taught me that nature has cures for many pains, including those of the soul. Mornings are my sacred time. After caring for the chickens, I prepare my coffee, put on my best dress, simple but always clean and well ironed, and go to the little church to pray. Not the same one where Ezekiel preached, of course. I never set foot in that one again. I attend a small Catholic chapel at the entrance to town. I return to my roots, to the Catholicism of my childhood in Crossroads, Missouri. I don't regret the years as a Baptist. Faith was always my strength, no matter what name we give to God. But I needed a complete, fresh start. In the chapel, I pray alone before the priest or anyone else arrives. I like the silence, the light filtered through the stained glass, the smell of wax and incense. I talk to God in my own way, without intermediaries. I ask forgiveness for what I did, although deep in my heart, I don't regret it. I imagine that God, who sees beyond appearances, understands my motives better than any human being. I return home, walking slowly, greeting neighbors along the way. Everyone knows me as Miss Judith, Pastor Ezekiel's widow. They respect me, have affection for me. If they knew, but they won't know. Some secrets need to be taken to the grave. My afternoons are filled with small joys. I knit sitting on the porch, watching life go by. Crochet too, although my fingers aren't as agile as before. I make quilts, scarves, caps. Some I sell at the craft fair that happens on Saturdays in the square. Others I give as presents to neighborhood children or for the church's winter clothing drive. From time to time, I receive a visit from Theodora, my closest neighbor, an 80-year-old lady, a widow like me, but who had the blessing of a happy marriage. We have tea together, exchange recipes, talk about the town's happenings. It's a comfort to have someone like that nearby. A true friend, the kind that life only presents us with when we already have white hair and wrinkles to tell stories. Sometimes, to my surprise, I also receive visits from some of those women, the ones from the boxes. We never talk directly about the past, about what happened. There's no need. They bring a cake, homemade bread, a jam. We sit on the porch, talk about the weather, about their children and grandchildren, about the life that blossomed after the shadow was gone. In these moments, I feel it was worth it. Every second of fear, every tear swallowed, every mark I carried on my skin and soul. Once a month, I go to the town center to do larger shopping, pay bills, resolve issues. I always pass in front of the old church where Ezekiel preached. Now it's pastored by Pastor Elijah, a young man with a sincere smile and clear eyes. They say he's kind to his wife, patient with his children, that his counseling is done in the presence of other deacons, always with open doors. Life goes on, and sometimes it improves. In the late afternoon, when the sun is already setting, I have my most important ritual. I kneel in my bedroom, light a candle, and pray asking forgiveness for my sins. I don't regret what I did. Never that. But I recognize that I took a life, even if it was the life of a monster, and that has its weight. My bedroom is simple, like the whole house. A single bed with a patchwork quilt that I made myself, a small wooden wardrobe, an antique dressing table that I bought at a thrift store. On the wall, only a crucifix and a photo of my parents, yellowed by time. I don't have photos of Ezekiel. I don't have material memories of those years. I preferred to leave everything behind, start from scratch. The nights are peaceful. I have a light dinner, a soup, a porridge, sometimes just fruit. Then I read a bit, usually the Bible or some poetry book that I borrow from the small-town library. I especially like Emily Dickinson, a woman who also blossomed late in life, who found her voice in isolation. I identify with her in a way I can't explain. Before sleeping, I sit at the window and contemplate the starry sky. I remember that girl who looked at the stars through the cracks in the wall, dreaming of freedom. It took a while, but the dream came true. Not in the way I imagined. Life rarely follows the scripts we write for it. But here I am, free, at peace, mistress of my own destiny. Many people might not understand my simple happiness, my satisfaction with so little. But those who have lived decades in darkness know how to value each ray of sunshine. Those who had their voice silenced for so long know the value of being able to say yes and no according to their own will. Those who were prisoners in their own home understand the blessing it is to open the door and go out without asking permission. I don't have biological children. That baby I lost in 1965 was my only pregnancy. But in a way, I feel I have spiritual daughters. Rachel, for example, who became the director of the municipal school and today guides young girls to seek education, independence. Or Nancy's daughter, Grace, who sometimes comes to visit me, bringing her embroidery for me to teach new stitches. Or Mary Beth's granddaughters, who call me Grandma Judith when they meet me in the square. If motherhood is caring, protecting, creating space for new lives to flourish, then I was a mother in that silent and decisive way when I prevented Ezekiel's safe from filling up with more names, more boxes, more broken lives. Now at 78, I look back and see a life that, despite all the pain, was worth it. Not for the part I lived in the shadow, but for what I built in the light. For the peace I found, for the freedom I conquered, for the small joys I learned to value. And mainly, for the certainty that, Even in the most desperate situations, there is always a way. It may be winding, it may be dangerous, it may be morally ambiguous. But it exists, and that's what makes me wake up smiling every morning, grateful for one more day, grateful to be alive, to be free, to be able to say, finally, this life is mine. My dear ones who have listened to me until now, I've reached my 78 years carrying a secret that few people in the world know. A secret I shared with you today, not to boast, not to seek absolution, but so you know that even in the darkest situations, there is a way out. I lived more than 20 years under the yoke of a man who used God's word as a whip, who hid behind the Bible to commit atrocities. Ezekiel's safe, with its boxes, its names, its macabre trophies, was the perfect portrait of his soul, cold and calculating. When I discovered that safe behind the painting of the Last Supper, something inside me changed forever. I realized that sometimes silence isn't virtue, it's complicity. I realized that blind obedience, even in the name of faith, can transform us into instruments of evil. If you who are listening to me now are trapped in an abusive situation, I want to say, there is a way out. God did not create anyone to be a punching bag. No verse from the Bible, correctly interpreted, justifies cruelty. As Psalms 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Life is too precious a gift to be lived in fear. True faith liberates, doesn't imprison. True love builds, doesn't destroy. As I learned in John 8:32, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." My dears, before I say goodbye, I want to ask a special favor. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Leave the word "light" in the comments so I know you watched until the end. Do it now, don't wait another minute. May God bless your path and give you courage to face your own safes, whatever they may be. This grandma here sends a tight hug to your heart.